Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Heretical Heathen podcast. It is I, the Grand Heretic, the Trollman of Wisconsin, the Tamer of Jotun, the Wanderer in the Dark, the host of this podcast, Robert Knox. And it's been one hell of a week, everybody. Summer is here, and the summer has been kicking us in the dick. If you've been listening for a while, you'll know that we don't just do this. My wife and I, we work farmers markets. She makes homemade soaps, body butter, sugar scrubs, beard stuff, and some of our stuff is meltable. And we finally reached the temperatures where we have to decide if and when we're going to work the markets because some of our stuff has started to melt or some of the oils in things like our body butters have started to separate. And not only has it been hot here, like we've finally hit rum 90s, which I guess if you're in the South doesn't seem that bad. But here it's kind of rough. And it's been very rainy. It's been raining like every other day. So it's hot and muggy. Truly awful. I do not like the heat. I am a pasty white guy. I am built for winter. You know, when you talk to people, they always tell me how much they hate winter. And this winter especially, I would agree. But as soon as summer gets here, you notice very quickly that everyone starts complaining about how hot it is. Nobody really likes the summer. They have a romantic idea in their head about the summer, and that's the thing they like. What people really like is a good 65, maybe 75 tops. They want to go outside, be cool, they want to have fun. And that's hard to do when you're sweating through your shoes. This week, I want to continue the series on scrying. And this week, we're scrying Gebo. Unlike some of our other runes, Gebo only shows up in the Anglo-Saxon rune poem. It's pretty short, so I'll read it. Gift is for every man, a pride and praise, help and worthiness, and of every homeless adventurer, it is the estate and substance for those who have nothing else. Or in my handy-dandy Heathen Golden Dawn book, a gift is for everyone, grace and glory, help and worthiness, and for the homeless wanderer, substance and sustenance when they have nothing else. Now, this rune shows essential aspect of, let's say, our ancestral spiritual practice and the cultural practices, and that's the concept of exchange. A gift wasn't something given lightly. It was always seen as a declaration of friendship. And of course, a declaration of friendship comes with certain benefits as well as certain obligations. If a friend of yours got in a legal dispute or in a feud of some kind, you had a duty to respond and to be on their side. If you abandon your friend, you could potentially lose standing within the community and everyone would know that you couldn't be trusted. And in a pre-modern world, a community that didn't trust you, that's a death sentence. Community is everything in a world that doesn't have our modern luxuries. In a world where you couldn't just go to the store and get food, you had to rely on hunting. And if hunting or fishing didn't go well for you, then you needed somebody in the community that could help you, that could provide you with food. And if you were hunting, you might likely need other people in the community to help you bring the game home. If you've never gone hunting, large game is quite heavy, even after gutting it. One person can barely drag a deer. It can be done, but it's very difficult. And a lot of hunting these days is done in the winter. So not only do you have to drag a large animal, you would have to drag them through the snow. And if you don't have something like a car to bring it home, then you would have to drag it from the hunting location back to your home or back to your tribe. And this isn't something that's easy to do alone. This is why community and Gebo is so important. In a pre-modern era, our ancestors had to work together in order to survive. Now, there's a lesson there for modern people. And this concept of the gift giving, the gift exchange cycle, it wasn't just a cultural thing. It also occurred in our spiritual practice. In order to enlist the cooperation of the gods or the dwarves or the whites, we had to befriend them. And one way to make friends, in fact, the chief way to make friends, is by giving them gifts. This act of gift giving was so important. A sacrifice was made to a white or a god, and then an equal valuable gift would be received in exchange. And if one didn't get something in return, then you wouldn't keep on sacrificing, praying harder and more humbly without getting anything in return. Kind of a waste of time. Now, I'm sure most of us have come across a person like this where you spend a lot of your time reaching out to them, doing stuff for them, giving them energy, maybe giving them gifts, buying them things, and then you get nothing in return. It's just cold. And you don't want to keep being that person's friend. Well, that's true spiritually as well. If you're praying to Odin, sacrificing to Odin for a thing and it never comes, then you don't keep sacrificing. You look for something else that's willing to help you. Maybe another god like Thor, Uller, or Forseti. Maybe Freyr. Maybe these gods are more willing to work with you. This model makes a lot of sense too. Now, for me, as a practicing magician, my primary deity is Odin, which makes a lot of sense if you look at the kind of character Odin is in the myths. He's a traveling wise man, he's a psychopomp, he's a magician. And so doing my practice with Odin in mind makes sense. But let's say I was a farmer and I needed rain to have good crops. It might not make sense to be sacrificing to Odin. Maybe I would want to sacrifice to Thor or Freyr. Maybe these gods are more willing to care about things like the growing of crops, while Odin may not. And this is where our religion really deviates from the Abrahamic religions. Now, I should briefly state that I am a Platonist and I'm leaving things like theurgy aside to talk about just more like lay religion. So, in our lay religion, you don't just worship things because they're all powerful gods that will judge you if you don't. You don't worship because not worshiping means you're going to be burned in a lake of fire for eternity. That's not how the heathens thought of the world. That's not how they pictured spirituality. And it's not only them. You don't see that model in the East as well, right? Not worshiping Kali or Shiva doesn't mean I'm going to be tortured for eternity. That's a strictly Abrahamic model. In our religion, if you're sacrificing, if you're worshiping, if you're praying to something that's not giving you something in return, then it might be a sign that that deity, that entity is simply not interested. And just like other persons, if they're not interested, you don't keep bothering them. You don't spend the time and energy putting it out there. You move on and find somebody who is interested. And you can take that lesson out of the spiritual into the mundane if you're trying to pick up a skill or lose some weight and the process by which you're doing so isn't yielding that result, then it's time to stop spending energy in that direction and find a new direction. Find something that works with you rather than against you. Now that I've done a good bit of ranting, I think it's time that we get into the scrying session. This session was interesting for me in a multitude of ways. First being, after I opened my Vey and got myself into my astral temple, I noticed that the imagery had changed. Now, typically when I go into these spaces, they're rather low resolution, almost quasi-cartoonish. And that'll happen. Different people can picture things differently. If I asked you to picture an apple in the dark with a spotlight on it on a stage, some people, when they do that, they'll have a hyper-realistic vision of that in their mind's eye. Other people like me might have something a little low resolution, little less than hyper-realistic. But this time, going into my temple, I noticed that the walls and the ground and the grass and the trees were almost hyper-realistic. Now, when I open up my sacred space, I do have like an altar in the middle from which I orient things around. And in the middle of the altar, I like to put a picture of the rune that I'm aiming for. Now, I do that every time. This time, I try to also go to my rune bag and grab the rune and hold it in my hand as well. So there's a connection forged between the rune on the middle of the altar and the rune that I'm holding. And maybe something about that made it more hyper-realistic. I'm not sure. After I got settled in the temple, I noticed that in the grass by my feet was a mouse. And I got close and took a good look at him, and he had a red X, a Gebo rune, across his back. So I picked him up and I put him on the tree that's often in the temple. And then I noticed that in one quadrant of the temple, there were suddenly sunflowers. They've never been there before. I don't eat sunflower seeds. I never think of sunflowers. They just happen to be there this time. So maybe there's a lesson there or something interesting that I need to think about in relation to Gebo. And like other scrying sessions, I went to the door and I opened it. And as soon as I opened it, I was on a dirt road in a kind of meadow, sort of like an old English looking place. And the dirt road went up a hill, and at the top of the hill was a castle. And it took a long time for me to get there. I could feel my feet on the dirt as I walked. And when I finally got to the castle door, to the top right, there was a little balcony coming out, and there was a guard sitting there. And he asked, "Who am I?" And I said, "My name." And he responded with, "Ah, Master has been expecting you." So after this response, the door to the castle opens, and the door opens to reveal a long hall with a red carpet down the middle and what appear to be pillars running down the side of it, big columns. So I walked down the hall, and they led to another door. And as soon as that door opened up, there was a man on a throne with a big wide hat. And I had to look this up because I've seen this before and I didn't know what kind of hat it was, but it stood out to me. It's sort of like a Renaissance cavalier hat. And without prompting, he made the sacred signs I usually ask for. So after this, he got up and he started walking towards me. And then I noticed that not only is he wearing this cavalier hat, he also has a sort of like a steely white mask on. And as he approaches, he's wearing black gloves, and the black gloves have red trim. Something about him felt a little shady, and so I decided to test him the way Odin tests the giant's wisdom. Oh, I'm going to mess this pronunciation up. Maybe I'll just do the sort of English, the Ballad of Vafthrûdnir, in which Odin goes to the giant. He asks him, who was the first giant, who's the highest among the Aesir, and so I started probing this character, just seeing if he could answer the questions. I learned this technique from some of the Christian esotericists that do scrying, and then they ask some of these beings to recite biblical passages, and I thought, hey, we kind of have a similar thing going on in the Eddas. Maybe I should take this technique that they do and use it with our material. And it seemed successful. I approached him and I asked him what Gebo was for, and he said, "A word begets a word, a deed, and a gift seeks a gift." And then I asked him, who is the highest god? And he responded, Odin, of course, but there may be one higher, and then he slightly winked through his mask. Rather than asking him what he meant by this, I told him that he kind of looked scary, and he laughed at that and said, well, this was my mask that I'm putting on him. And I thought this response is kind of interesting, because one does wonder if any of these things have a particular form, or if there's something about my particular consciousness that needs an image in order to make sense of what I'm seeing. And so it takes some kind of material from my subconscious and puts together a character in order for me to understand it. But after this set of questioning, I asked this being what he had to show me. And we walked to the right, and we walked up to a door, and the door was purple. And he opened the door, and as soon as we went through it, we were in like a longhouse or a hof of sorts. And before us stood 3 big god poles. They were male figures, potentially something like Odin, Thor, and Freyr. And in front of them were 3 braziers. Or is it braziers? Either way, there were 3 bowls with fire. And as we got closer, it appeared to me as if the 3 collapsed into one. But this could not have been the case, because as I looked over at this being who guided me here, he pulled off his left glove, and with his right he pulled out a knife, and he slit his wrist, and he poured some of the blood into the fire, into the brazier. And then he turned the knife towards him and handed it to me, hilt first, as if I was to do the same thing. Now, I found this a little odd, but nonetheless, I did exactly as he did. And so there still seemed to be multiple braziers with fire. Now, before I did exactly what he did, I invoked the highest just in case this was a potential lower entity kind of messing with me, potentially trying to harm me. But nothing happened. So I did what he did. I took the knife and I cut myself and I bled into the fire. And once my blood hit the fire, it roared up and it turned blue. And then suddenly, it died. The fire disappeared. And an object was in the bottom of the basin. And this object, it wasn't a Nordic object, which is what I was expecting. Right? I do a lot of Germanic stuff. My mind is using a lot of Germanic symbolism. And instead, in the bottom, what I found was a Vajra. I'm not super familiar with Eastern schools, but a Vajra is like a ritual tool used across the Dharmic traditions, such as like Hinduism and Buddhism. This is going to be like a Wikipedia style breakdown, but a Vajra symbolizes the irresistible shattering force of a thunderbolt and the unbreakable, indestructible nature of wisdom and enlightenment. And as I was looking at it, I felt my mind trying to form it into a hammer, so it would be a small little Mjolnir, but it wouldn't happen. It stayed in the shape that it was. After I picked up the Vajra, suddenly the scene I'm in goes completely white. Like the loading scene of the Matrix, just all white, everything. And the Vajra in my hand explodes and it turns to dust. And suddenly a light comes down from above, and a second Vajra is formed out of pure light. And so I reach up and I grab it. I take this new light Vajra in my hand, and once it's in my hand, I hear this booming voice that says, "That's all for now," and my temple appears, and I'm back in my temple. If you've been paying attention to these scrying sessions, they're kind of all over the place, and you'll notice a lot of the time that what happens in the scrying session doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the runes themselves. There's not a lot of correlation between a particular rune poem and the realm once scrying. However, in Gebo, the moments where me and this being had to offer our blood to a fire and then we received a sort of divine weapon in return, you could see Gebo there. But otherwise, I don't really see it happening much. And I started talking to adepts of the Golden Dawn, guys like Nick Farrell, and he mentioned that there are spirits associated with these things, with the Germanic religions, that will make themselves manifest, that you're sort of building an open connection with. And these might be figures not necessarily seen in the myths themselves, or they might be figures potentially from the myths under a new guise, a new sort of cloak for a modern person to understand. Now, in their schools of the Golden Dawn, of course, they have other students and teachers, people they can discuss these things with. So you can see if there's imagery lining up when people are doing this. But as far as I know, I'm the only person out here scrying the runes, and so I'm kind of wading these waters by myself, and I guess leaving a sort of audio diary for anyone else who wants to attempt the work. And I just want to give a special thank you to guys like Nick Farrell for helping me out and even giving me the time of day. So if you haven't, go check out Nick Farrell, check him out on Substack, go look at his books. He's written like 50 books. The man is a fucking legend. And let me know what you guys think about this scrying session. Leave a comment, leave a like, share this on all of your platforms. It really helps me out. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day, and we'll catch you next time.